Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 81st ever Highlight Haven interview. My name's Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Chicago Bears journalist Jacob Infante. Jacob, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, Matthew. It's great to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, getting right into it, from 2018 to 2022, you wrote at USA Today for the Draft Wire, and currently you cover the Chicago Bears for the Windy City Gridiron, as well as being a draft analyst for Pro Football Network. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry, and, how would you describe the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good question, and I can tell with the draft wire and the USA Today mention, you did your
Mhm.
research, so I appreciate that, which is awesome. So I think I knew I wanted to be involved in sports in some capacity from a young
Mhm.
age. I think I was probably 6 or 7 when I first really started getting into football,
Yeah.
uh, and that ended up. Being a passion of mine for the longest time. And then, somewhere along the lines, I started getting into writing, even
Mhm.
just like little short stories and stuff like that when I was younger. And then I found out somewhere along the way that, hey, you can combine those two.
Mhm.
You can write about sports,
Yeah.
novel concept. But uh, I knew that as soon as I found out about that, as soon as I saw,
Mhm.
that there were people out there doing this, I wanted to do it in some capacity. So
Mhm.
uh, I've been writing in general since 2016, as far as like writing for another
Mhm.
publication. But even before then, like I made my own website, and me and a couple of my friends would write articles on it, and just talk about Chicago sports and stuff like that. So it's definitely been something that I've known I've wanted to be involved in some capacity for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I know I've noticed, the more I advance in just life and my career in general, I think that it's it's still a passion that burns bright, and
Mhm.
that's something where I'm able to continue writing about what I enjoy writing about. I think that's a big part of it too, is that I lucky to have the freedom that I do
Mhm.
to talk about the things that I'm passionate about, and it's something I'm incredibly grateful for. So it's been a favorite pastime of mine, whether it's as a form of income or just as like a passive something on the side,
Mhm.
in for quite some time.
Absolutely. And, getting into the Chicago Bears, this offseason, they made multiple additions to their offensive line, adding Joe Tooney, Drew Dahlman, and Jonah Jackson. How do you see these new offensive line affecting Caleb Williams in 2025 after being sacked the most of any quarterback last season? And it wasn't particularly close. He was sacked 68 times. CJ Stroud, I think, was second at 52. What are these changes to the O line? How are they going to impact that? What can we expect to see from Caleb in the pocket this year?
Yeah, so I think that such a big part of it comes down to who the head coach is right now, and I think Ben Johnson, what the success that he saw in Detroit, being able to identify, all right, a big part of the, maybe not the only reason, but a big part of the reason that my offense worked so well in Detroit was because I had a really good offensive line, and Chicago didn't, at least heading into this year,
Mhm.
or this offseason rather. So I think that that was something that certainly played into the decision to be super aggressive, signing and trading for the veterans you mentioned. So I think that, I mean, in theory, uh, on paper, it's a much better offensive line, which should give Caleb, even just if it's a half second more time, to be able to process, to be able to find the open man, to be able to determine, all right, who do I get the ball out? Do I scramble? Do I run with it? What do I do? And I think that that should put him at ease, because I
Mhm.
think that with Caleb's play style, there are some instances where he holds onto the ball too long, but I think that that's not always a fault, because you have quarterbacks who hang onto the ball a little bit longer, who are more athletic. I know Russell Wilson in his prime would consistently be at the top or near the top in
Mhm.
uh, time to throw, and most of that wasn't because of the pocket that he had. It was just because he created outside of structure. And I think that that's something that Caleb's going to do as well and continue to do. But I think that giving him a better offensive line should, I mean, number one, see him get sacked a lot less. I mean, that's ultimately what they're looking for, because like you said, it's the offensive line that allowed the most sacks in the league last year. So bringing in Joe Tooney, a first team All Pro, bringing in Drew Dalman, a guy who's been a top 5 graded center by PFF each of the last 2 years, and then Jonah Jackson, someone who was a Pro Bowler in Ben Johnson's system in Detroit before he went over to Los Angeles. It clearly shows that it's Ben Johnson's show, and he's doing what he needs to do to build it around Caleb Williams. So it's something I'm excited about. Obviously, we have to wait and see how it all comes together on the field. But I think, in practice, they definitely made the right moves.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Joe Tooney, on May 20th, they extended him $17.5 million per season, 3-year, $51 million contract, including $33.5 million guaranteed. He is the highest pass block win rate in the NFL over the past 2 years, coming off back-to-back seasons as a first-team All-Pro, and was selected to the third straight Pro Bowl in 2024. Can you just break down your initial reaction to this extension?
I think that the extension definitely helps. I mean, obviously, with a player like Tooney, he's been in the league for some time, going into his mid 30s. And it's a 2-year extension. So it's not like, all right, we're going to be paying this guy 20 something million dollars when he's nearing 40 necessarily. But I think that from a tenure of, all right, there's the 1 year that he's playing on his current contract, and then 2 years after that, which, the first year the extension is guaranteed essentially, but the second, maybe could be opportunity for, a release if God forbid that, it doesn't work out necessarily. But I think when you look at Joe Tooney, you see someone who's so smart and he's so technically sound that I think that even as he gets older, he might not be the fastest guy anymore, but he's still so refined in terms of his weight distribution, as far as how he processes different looks and different rush packages that are ahead of him. And, that and the play strength he plays with as well. So I think that extending Tooney is definitely huge. Provides some more, continuity for the offensive line going forward. And I think that's a very important thing, especially for a young quarterback like Caleb Williams. And it also ensures that those resources you have in 2026 and beyond, you don't have to be in as big of a rush to replace Joe Tooney. So, they traded a 4th-round pick for him. That's not necessarily massive draft capital, but it's still enough to the point where it's like, all right, if you're ideally you're trading for more than 1 year of Joe Tooney. And, that's what it's going to end up being more than likely with this extension now. So I think that extending him was a good move. The contract value itself is strong. I think that it, as far as his 2024 play, maybe a little bit low, but at the same time, also accounting for, potential steps back, which do happen once you get into your mid to late 30s in the NFL. So overall, I think it's a good move, honestly. And I think that I have very little reason to believe that there's going to be a massive, drop off or anything like that in play from Tooney in 2025, even though he's on a different team now.
And, last season, getting into the running back core a little bit, DeAndre Swift, you actually made a post about this recently, giving this stat. He was one of 17 running backs to have at least 210 carries and was the only one of those 17 to not average at least 4 yards per carry. How much pressure do you think is on Swift this season to have a breakout year, or at least a better year than he had last season, maybe 100 or 1,000 rushing yards? And what are your expectations for him now that he obviously has the upgraded offensive line, as well as a new running backs coach with Eric Bieniemy?
Yeah, I think that the expectation should definitely be higher with DeAndre Swift now. Having that new offensive line, having the new offense in place, and the coaching staff that's around him. I also think that the fact that the Bears didn't draft a running back until round 7 with Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers,
Yep.
I think that, that was good value, but again, it's a seventh round pick. I don't think it's necessarily wise to expect that he's going to take over as the starter.
Mhm.
I mean, if he does, that's awesome. That's tremendous investment. But realistically, you're looking at a backup level guy. So Swift enters the year as the bona fide starting running back. And I think that that provides an opportunity for him to bounce back essentially. But I do think that, the the seat's getting a little bit hot underneath him because they do have the opportunity to cut him. I don't know off the top of my head how much money it is. I think it's like $6-7 million they save with like a 2 to 3 million dead cap hit in 2026 if they do cut him. So, I mean, obviously, if he's producing at a suboptimal efficiency rate, then and the yards per carry aren't where they need to be, then I could definitely see them, cutting loose, especially
Yeah.
with a, you know, currently is projected to be a really good running back free agency class with I mean, as it stands right now, you've got guys like James Cook, Kyron Williams, Kenneth Walker, all slated to hit free agency. Uh, I don't know if all of them will, but I'm sure some of them certainly will. And then you look forward to the draft. I mean, Jeremiah Love out of Notre Dame looks like a potential first rounder at this stage. There are a couple other guys, Nick Singleton from Penn State, Mekhi Hughes, the Oregon transfer, to name a few, that could go in those earlier rounds. So they'll have options to replace him if he doesn't produce. I think that there's certainly he's in a much better situation for 2025 than he was in 2024. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I do think that if you see kind of similar results, at least in terms of yards per
Yeah.
carry, in terms of how often he's consistently picking up those first downs, then they might look to go elsewhere at the running back position.
And, we're going to get into this year's draft, obviously, but in the fifth round of the 2024 NFL draft, the Bears selected Kansas edge Austin Booker. Can we expect to see a big jump in production from Booker this season? What could that potentially look like following a fairly unproductive rookie campaign where he had 1.5 sacks and 21 combined tackles, only 14 solo tackles?
Yeah, so I think that there's definitely reason to be optimistic with Austin Booker, especially. Sorry, hold.
All right, we lost you there for a second, but we have you back. We were talking about Austin Booker and the jump he could potentially take this upcoming season. What might that look like in your mind?
Yeah, so I think when you look at Austin Booker, is a player that the Bears were very high on coming out of Kansas, and if you recall, they traded up to get him. They used future draft capital to be able to move up for him.
Mhm,
Once they took Torrey Taylor in that fourth round, the expectation was, all right, that's it. The Bears were going to come out with just that. Those four draft picks that they ended up having, but they gave up a future fourth round pick to acquire Austin Booker in the
mhm,
fifth round. So I think that that definitely shows how highly they value him.
mhm,
But also, I'd say the current roster provides him an opportunity to succeed. So
mhm,
Montez Sweat is going to be starting at edge rusher, and Dio Odeyingbo probably will be too. But they don't have a proven third edge rusher. And even then, Odeyingbo has been a little bit up and down in terms of his sack production. When the Bears took Booker, I viewed it as a bit more of a red shirt kind of pick. Because you turn on the tape at Kansas, the tools were tremendous. You see, the length, the quickness, the motor, the finesse, but his I'd say his processing wasn't quite where it needed to be. He was a little bit late in the pants, and when he's engaging with blockers as a run defender, the anchor maybe isn't as strong as it needed to be. So I saw his rookie year as all right. You probably shouldn't expect a whole lot, and admittedly, he didn't produce a ton, like you said.
mhm,
Uh, I think that what's going to be key for him is to see, has he gotten stronger? Has his internal clock in terms of knowing what moves to use and when, has that sped up for him? So if it does, then I could see him being a valuable rotational pass rusher for sure. Because Odeyingbo, I'd say, at least on tape, I know the PFF grading doesn't necessarily agree with me, but I think that Odeyingbo is a little bit more valuable as a run defender than he is as a pass rusher. And even then, there are going to be some times they might kick him inside as well. So you have Deo at defensive tackle, and then Booker off the edge. Where there's a little bit more juice along the defensive line, a little bit more speed. So
Mhm.
I think Booker's going to have an opportunity to shine. Whether or not he does, I mean, yet to be determined. But I think that the tools are there for him to succeed. I know I had him as like a late third, early fourth round pick, and there were a lot of draft analysts who were even higher on him than I
Mhm.
was. Uh, so I mean, clearly the tools are there. The upside is there. It's just a matter of if he's going to be able to reach that potential, because outside of Deo, the Bears didn't really make a massive move at edge. They didn't draft anyone. They didn't sign anyone else really in free agency to a contract notable that indicates, all right, this guy's going to make the team and see playing time. So they're betting on Booker in a big way here. So that's the one thing that remains to be seen that I think could make or break the Bears season is, I mean, in addition to Caleb, obviously, uh, is, that edge rusher group. But if Austin Booker takes the jump, then that's going to be really helpful for them.
And, speaking of this year's draft class, the Bears selected Michigan tight end Colston Loveland with the 10th overall pick in the draft. Loveland brings a very dynamic skill set to the table. He can thrive both as a pass catcher as well as, in the run blocking department. That said, what are you primarily expecting his role to look like in 2025, playing in obviously an extremely crowded Chicago Bears receiving room?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting for sure. I think, going into week one, Cole Kmet's got to be considered the tight end one, so to speak. But I wouldn't be surprised if Loveland ends up being that guy by the end of the year. I think that part of that comes down to Loveland's versatility. I think he's a lot
Yeah.
more effective out in the slot than Cole Kmet is, where he's a little bit more of an inline sort of tight end who thrives, uh, you know, closer to the line of scrimmage, or in that regard, closer where all the action is. Uh, but yeah, I think that with Loveland, he provides an interesting wrinkle to where if you're, say, you bring out Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland at the same time, and you're running 12 personnel, so uh, with the two tight ends in there, you have to respect the run naturally, just because of the size of the personnel that you're working with. But Loveland is a good enough athlete that he can separate from man coverage out of the slot against these linebackers or some of these safeties. So I think that adds a little bit of an advantage, and it makes things a little bit more difficult for the defenses to read exactly what to expect and exactly what's going on. So I think that's going to be an aspect we'll see a lot of Colston Loveland this year. I mean, in addition to as an inline tight end, in addition to him serving as a run blocker as well. Uh, I know that a lot of people compared Loveland to Sam Laporta coming out of Michigan. So when Sam Laporta was coming out of Iowa, obviously he ended up in Detroit, and Ben Johnson ended up being his play caller. Laporta was a Pro Bowl talent there, so I think that, I mean, obviously the fit makes a lot of sense there. And from a long-term perspective, I think they see Loveland, I mean, as a superior athlete, which, I mean, I agree. I think Komet's a bit of a better blocker, a little bit more physical, but Loveland gives this ability to stretch the field. He gives the ability to win on those, intermediate and deep routes, in addition to being that security blanket on, underneath routes or hooks or curl, whatever the case might be. So I think that Loveland, at least this year, should give them a good amount of versatility and, make it more difficult for opposing defenses to read exactly what's going to be going on.
Mhm. And kind of working our way down the draft in the second round, pick 39, Bears selected Missouri wide receiver Luther Burden the third. In 2024, 85.3% of Burden snaps came from the slot. What's that target distribution going to look like in 2025, coming in instantly as wide receiver three behind both DJ Moore and Rome Odunze?
I'm interested to see how Burden fares in that Chicago room,
Yeah.
especially in 2025. I mean, like you said, a lot of his reps took place in the slot. I know, if I'm not mistaken, I'm a Mizzou fan and an alumnus there, so
Mhm.
obviously there's a little bit of bias, but at the same time, getting to watch him develop,
Yeah.
getting to watch him grow, I think he's definitely plays at his best in the slot, and I think that that's another thing too, where you can have him in the slot and Loveland as an inline tight end going forward, and that's a very athletic group to stop. So if I had to hazard a guess, I think Burden's going to come in, assuming he stays healthy, I think somewhere in like the 40, 50 catches a year range.
Mhm.
Especially because, going back and looking at last year's offense, I mean, that's a little bit less than what Roma Dunze had his rookie year, but you also factor in that the Bears have two, in theory, two high quality tight ends, whereas opposed to last year, they only had one. So
Mhm.
uh, I think Burden's definitely going to have some sort of involvement. I think he'll serve as the primary slot receiver. Sometimes Loveland will come in and rotate there in those 12 personnel situations. I also think that Burden's going to get some opportunities in the run game as well. Uh, and that's something you saw sporadically with Mizzou. I mean, they used him on screens. I truly think he was the
Yeah.
best yards after catch receiver in this class. I know PFF, out of the receivers who were drafted, Luther Burden had the highest elusive rating. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly what the number ended up being, but I remember it
Mhm.
wasn't even remotely close in terms of
Yeah.
just how many tackles he broke. And it shows on tape the agility, the toughness, the contact balance, the ball carrier vision. Uh, I think you can use him on jet sweeps, end arounds. Maybe some instances you have him in the backfield. You
Mhm.
could have him run like a wheel route or a Texas route or something out of the backfield and take advantage of that opportunity. So I think Burden's going to have a role in this offense for sure. I know he's used to being the big man on campus. Essentially, I mean, he was treated like a god at Mizzou. That's not necessarily going to be the case in Chicago, at least not right away. But I think there's going to be a very real opportunity for him to make some noise in this offense in a variety of different ways.
Mhm. And then with the Bears' second pick in the second round, they went with Boston College right tackle Ozzie Trapillo. Trapillo's 6'8". He's instantly coming in as one of the tallest players in the entire league. Darnell Wright is currently Chicago's starting right tackle. How realistic is it that Trapillo could potentially earn that starting role, or at least compete for that starting role at some point throughout the season?
Yeah, so I think something that's valuable about Ozzy is the fact that he has experience playing both tackle spots.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think majority of his time at Boston College was spent as a right tackle, but he
Mhm.
can play left. At least he showed he could at the Power Four level. So I think that at least going into this year, he's going to serve as the primary swing tackle. So say if Braxton Jones at left tackle isn't able, because I know he's hurt right now. If he isn't able to come back in time for Week 1, I could see Trapillo starting Week 1. I mean, then again, if anything were to go down with Darnell Wright, I think Trapillo would be the first man up to step in at right tackle. But honestly, I think that Trapillo is a bit of an insurance policy, more so for Braxton Jones than Darnell Wright. And with that being said, Braxton has been a solid starting tackle. Uh, I wouldn't necessarily say he's been more than that. So there lies the problem where you have solid offensive tackles making $20 million a year. I mean, the Titans paid that much for Dan Moore, and coming in from Pittsburgh, I'd argue Braxton Jones is better than that. So if the league agrees, I know some analysts do. I know some analytics sites do. Then Braxton could be in for a massive payday. But at the same
Mhm.
time, it's like, are you going to be willing to pay that much money to an average starting left tackle? I don't
Yeah.
know if the Bears do. So the way I look at it is, I mean, I think Ozzy's insurance in that regard, where worst case scenario, you use a late second round pick on a swing tackle. I mean, there are worse outcomes you can have. Uh, but I do think that they see him as a potential long term starter at left tackle. I mean, whether or not he ends up being that, remains to be seen. but I think there's certainly potential for him. I mean, you mentioned the height and how well he moves for a guy that tall. I think that's the real differentiator. You don't see guys who can, who can bend the knees and stay low as well as Ozzy can, at least for a 6'8" guy. So my comparison for him coming out was Mike McGlinchey. So I mean, and obviously McGlinchey has been a right tackle. We're talking Ozzy is, maybe a left tackle, but I see similar, tools with the height and the athleticism.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe a little bit light in the pants. Maybe you want him to gain, 10 or so pounds or something like that so he can better, you know, work against edge rushers setting the edge. Uh, but I think there's a similar ceiling there where he can be another solid starting tackle. Uh, of course, there's a chance you run this all the way back in 4 years from now where, Ozzy ends up being a solid starter, but he's not more than that. And it's like, oh, do I have to pay him? But that's way down the line. That's not something to worry about right now. I think that bringing in a guy like Trapillo gives them a very valuable insurance option, as well as someone who has the potential to be much more than that.
And the last player that I want to discuss, from this draft, and the Bears' third second-round pick 62, Texas A&M defensive tackle Shamar Turner. Turner is extremely explosive, really aggressive on defense. He can be that aggressor. However, he had 5 personal foul penalties last season in college. What can we expect to see from him this upcoming season? And is his lack of discipline and control potentially going to affect him as a rookie?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I know that's been, like the talking point with him is
Yeah.
obviously he's a tremendous talent, but you have all these, personal fouls against him. I'd
Mhm.
argue, this is going to sound crazy because obviously,
Mhm.
penalties are never a good thing. I'd argue that he's kind of what the Bears need,
Mhm.
where especially coming off of you know, with the old coaching regime, things were kind of uninspired. The locker room was kind of lackadaisical at times. It seemed like, okay, there are guys who aren't really trying their best. To have someone who's too passionate, I'd say, to the point where he's getting himself so emotionally invested in the game that he's,
Yeah.
he's throwing hands. Or I saw one, he like low blowed a guy, like it's like just literally just like punching him. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
insane. Uh, but I definitely agree. I think that the effort and the juice that he brings at defensive tackle, there's a lot to like there. I see someone who he's, quick off the ball, like you said, low to the ground too. I think that's something where, he's not the tallest defensive tackle, but as a part of that, he's more flexible, and that
Mhm.
helps him stand his ground and win with leverage at the point of attack. And I think he does that really well. And he has the awareness as a run defender too, to know, all right, I've got a running back coming up this gap. This is how I'm going to shed this particular block. These are the moves I'm going to use in order to free up my hands and make the tackle, and then going from there and doing that. So I see him as an effective two gapper, someone who's going to contribute uh, to the defensive tackle rotation. I don't think he's going to start right away, but I think that they have some talent at defensive tackle that, that's okay if he doesn't start right away because he's going to see playing time. I know
Yeah.
a lot of the best teams just rotate defensive tackles very often. I know the Eagles, I mean, with the exception of Jalen Carter, they'd move in, Milton Williams would play like 30-40% of snaps.
Mhm.
Fletcher Cox would be in the mix, Jordan Davis, Moro Ajomo, guys like that. They all, play a role in that interior defensive line. I expect the Bears, especially with the spending they had, bringing in Turner and then signing Grady Jarrett in free agency, I think they're going to utilize those guys as well as Andrew Billings, as well as Javon Dexter. So it's going to be exciting to watch. I was a very big fan of the Turner pick. I think that he
Mhm.
was good value where they got him near the very end of the second round. And I think he's someone who, I don't know if he's ever going to be a star, but I feel pretty confident he'll at least, like, he'll have a role. He'll have his niche in the NFL, and he'll be a
Yeah.
solid contributor for quite a while.
Mhm. Now, just around 2 weeks ago, the Bears' preseason schedule was announced. They have two home games, one against the Dolphins on August 10th, the other against the Bills on August 17th, followed by a road game against the Chiefs on August 22nd. We're still over 2 months away from this, but did anything really jump out to you about their preseason schedule? Any observations that you made?
I mean, not particularly. I mean,
Mhm.
I just look at it more so as, having those home games is a helpful, opportunity to, especially for some of the newer guys, to get used to
Mhm.
Soldier Field, to get used to playing in front of that
Yeah.
crowd, playing on that field. I know that there's some times where people can complain about the field conditions, with the grass that they have at Soldier Field, sometimes not being, properly tended to or whatever. But at the same time, I think that, it's going to be a good chance for some of the lower on the roster guys competing for those backup spots to you know get some playing time. I think in particular it's going to be a good opportunity. There are a couple cornerbacks I think are going to be competing for a spot. Guys, little bit lower on the depth chart, but like Terrell Smith, Zay Frazier, they drafted in the fifth round out of UTSA, Josh Blackwell, and a couple other guys that they've signed throughout the years, like Nashawn Wright, Sean Wade, players like that. So uh, corners one, I think offensive line, being able to get to see some of the young guys. I expect, barring injury, we'll see a decent amount of Ozzie Trapillo. We'll see Luke Newman, the sixth rounder they got out of Michigan State. He was a superstar at Holy Cross along the offensive line and then stepped into Michigan State, performed admirably. Uh, and then other guys, Karana Magaji as well. I think, the third rounder that they took out of Yale in 2024, he, missed the whole training camp period. He missed OTAs and minicamp and everything, recovering from a torn ACL, and then was just thrown right into the fire right out of the gate. And I think that as a rookie who played in the FCS and is coming off of an injury, to just be like almost as soon as he was healthy to be thrown into the starting lineup, I think was kind of unfair to him. And I think a lot of people have kind of written him off as a result of that. I wouldn't be so sure because, you turn on the tape at Yale, obviously it's different competition, but he's got insanely long arms. He's a tremendous athlete. You saw a lot of the tools. He blocks hard. You saw a lot of the same tools that you saw out of Braxton Jones when he was at Southern Utah coming out, and then he ended up being a solid starter. So I wouldn't give up hope on Amagaji yet, but I know that's my long-winded answer of saying from a preseason perspective, the schedule I wouldn't pay too much attention to, but I think there are definitely going to be a lot of things going into that, as well as just getting a lay of the land and understanding basic concepts of Ben Johnson's offense and
Mhm.
Dennis Allen's defense from there.
Yeah. And following the draft, the Bears made multiple undrafted free agent signings. Wide receiver Darren Peterson, linebacker Don Cherry, defensive back Kevin Peterson, just to name a few. Um, that said, what UDFA signings do you see making the biggest impact or having the largest role this upcoming season, assuming that, obviously some of these guys make the 53-man roster?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question too. I'd say the one at least off of my draft analysis, I think the guy I was the highest on that they ended up signing was Power Eccles, the linebacker out of North Carolina.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure if he's going to end up making the team, just because. I mean, naturally, I think that the linebacker position is going to be competitive. I mean, you brought in Ruben Hippolyte from Maryland that they drafted in the fourth round. Amen Ogbongbemega. Noah Sewell is, was just a fifth round pick from 2023. So they have guys in the mix there who have, played NFL ball already, or they used, higher draft capital on. So, but at the same time, I think Eccles, he's an intelligent physical tackler. Might not be the best athlete out there, but I think he's someone who's going to contribute on special teams in the preseason, and I think he could in the NFL on a 53-man roster as well. Uh, I don't necessarily think that's going to be this year, but I think down the stretch, if he continues to develop in the way he has, uh, it's possible. And I know there's another guy too where this isn't going to be the the guy who gets all the headlines, but Luke Elkin, long snapper,
Yeah.
they got out of from Iowa, is an
Mhm.
undrafted free agent. So he previously used to snap to Tory Taylor at Iowa, and I think the Bears find themselves in an interesting position at long snapper, where Patrick Scales was their guy for so many years. And then all of a sudden he got hurt before last year. They had to scramble to find a replacement. They signed Scott Daly as a veteran free agent. He filled in pretty well. Uh,
Mhm.
that said, it's not like he's been the guy for 10 years. He's built up, like realistically, he's on a 1 year trial basis
Mhm.
practically. So I think having Elkin in, a guy who's younger, a guy who has that experience snapping to Tory Taylor, not just on punts obviously, but on field goals and on PATs, where that chemistry between the long snapper and the holder is it's very valuable, and the placement from everything from the laces to the spin, like it's all calculated. And uh, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know if Luke Elkin ends up becoming the long snapper, but I think that his youth, along with the fact that he's previously already snapped to Tory Taylor, I mean, I think at the very least it makes things interesting. So he's the one guy I'd say probably has the best chance of making the team. Uh, I know people aren't going to be writing headlines about it. I'm not going to do a super deep dive into, what's the long snapping battle going to look like. But it's something to keep an eye on. So I think
Mhm.
he's someone
Yeah.
I'd say probably out of the undrafted guys they brought in, I'd say
Mhm.
he's got the best shot.
And now that free agency is mostly wrapped up, the draft is over. Are there any gaps on Chicago's roster on their depth chart that kind of concern you as we get closer to the start of the season?
Yeah, so I'd say I mean there are two that I'm looking at where I'm like I'm kind of iffy on. I'd
Mhm.
say edge rusher, and I know I touched on that a little bit, where I thought Odeyingbo he's an upgrade in their starting lineup for sure over Demarcus Walker, but I
Mhm.
don't nec- I wouldn't I don't know necessarily if I'd say he's an $11 million upgrade or a
Mhm.
$12 million upgrade. I'd say they might have been better off using that money elsewhere, or signing someone else. But I mean, there's plenty of time for them to prove me wrong on that. And then I mentioned, Austin Booker. He's slated to be the edge rusher 3 in that whole room. He's unproven. The tools are definitely there, but I would have preferred that they not have to rely so much on him taking on that bigger role,
Yeah.
considering he hasn't proven himself there yet. Uh, the potential's there. Don't get me wrong with this group. I just think there are a couple question marks that remain to be seen. So I mean, we'll TBE on that. But
Mm.
I think in the running back room, I know we talked a little bit about too. DeAndre Swift coming off of a down year where he wasn't necessarily super efficient. They didn't make any major moves to add to that room. They added, they drafted Monangai in the 7th round. Again, that was a pick I liked. I had a 5th round value on him, so to get him in round 7, makes sense. It works. It's a good pick. Uh, but still, the expectation shouldn't be incredibly high for a day 3 rookie. If it works, awesome. If not, you're not really losing out on too much because the stakes aren't super high. But that said, I do think the Bears wanted to improve the running back room. Yeah, I mean, you get the sense where there were rumors they might have they tried to trade up for Ashton Genty, obviously didn't work out. There were taking a look. I don't remember who it was. It was someone on the New England Patriots beat who said that he indicated that the Bears were looking at Travion Henderson with the 39th overall pick, and then the Patriots took him the pick right before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, they ended up with Luther Burden. That's a pick I'm super happy with.
Mhm.
But losing out on Henderson, and then Judkins went a couple picks before that too, to Cleveland was a little bit of a bummer. And then to add insult to injury, uh, looking in that 4th round, you had Cam Scadaboo and Bashal Tutin both on the board heading into day 3 of the draft. Both of them went off the board in those couple picks right before the Bears got on the clock. So,
Mhm.
I mean, clearly there are opportunities for the Bears to upgrade that got taken away from them. Uh, I'm a little bit worried. I mean, I'd say it's not necessarily like, oh, I have concerns about their offensive line now, or I have concerns about the quarterback position. I mean, I think those are more valuable than the running back position itself. But at the same time, it would have been nice to add someone else to the mix. I mean, I don't think that I don't think that DeAndre Swift one way or another is going to make or break. All right, do the Bears make the playoffs or not? But I guess that's a position, and then edge as well is one where it's like, okay, there's potential here, but I don't know necessarily if it's all going to work out.
Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster or journalist like me, what would it be?
I'd say, and honestly, I think just judging off of like getting in touch with you and like seeing the people that you've been talking to, I'd say networking is huge. And I mean, especially from a young age too, it gives you, in theory, it should give you an advantage down the line to where
Yeah.
you build these connections, you build these contacts, and keep these relationships going. I
Yeah.
think that uh, just in any line of work, it's what you know, but it can also be who you know. And I think that a lot of people in this industry are going to they're really open to helping, especially, as you're like up and coming in the industry. Some of those opportunities, they might be a little bit more closed. I mean, it also depends on who you talk to, but like as if you're, asking for advice in like your 30s or 40s or something like that. So I'd say take advantage of, time is your friend. So
Mhm.
learn from as many people as you can, make as many connections as possible, and don't stop reading too. I think that's another thing that I do is I even to this day I learned so much about draft analysis, about football analysis, about certain ways to frame paragraphs and
Mhm.
storytelling based off of reading other people's articles, and uh, or if you're doing other forms of media by watching other people's podcasts or newsreels or whatever it might be. uh, there's a lot you can learn and pick up from other people, and obviously you adjust it to make it your own and find your own groove that works for you. But those are a couple of the things I'd say. Networking is huge, and then just be a sponge. It's a little cliche to say because you hear it everywhere, but I'd say the more receptive you are to picking things up, the more receptive you are to learning from people. I think the better off you'll be in the long run.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work?
Yeah, so you guys can find me down below my little usernames over there at
Mhm.
Jacob Infante 24. You can find me on Twitter/X. My Bears articles are over at Windy City Gridiron, so that's Chicago Bears as well as NFL Draft.
Mhm.
And at Pro Football Network, I also do NFL draft analysis and just general NFL content as well. So uh, my Patreon is patreon.com/Jacob Infante. Uh, Over the course of the year, I publish, Bears centric content there as well as NFL draft work. I had my NFL draft guide come out there, which ended
Mhm.
up being, I think it was like 120 pages, something along those lines of, different analysis and content and stuff like that. So, uh, real labor of love. But yeah, so that's where you guys can find me. I mean, I appreciate you having me, and grateful to be on the show.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. Again, big thanks to Jacob Infante for being the 81st ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.